The policeman had heard everything she had said about illegal departure and approached the unsuspecting woman. When she noticed him, her heart began to pound anxiously. Jennifer knew she was in an awkward position, with no way out when the officer told her he had overheard everything and asked her to get into his squad car. Public domain retired Jennifer Williams lived a life of cherishing each day as a gift in Royal Oak, Michigan. She was grateful for the little things but was dependent on her husband, so she didn't go out much. Frances had met Jennifer at a diner 40 years ago, when she was a waitress there at the age of 30. Frances, who was 42 at the time, happened to drop by. Francis, despite being married before, fell in love with Jennifer as soon as he saw her. He'd stopped for coffee on his way to his job as a psychologist. The two got engaged after 9 months and were as happy as they could be. They had been married for 20 years when they finally moved to Royal Oak, Michigan after their retirement from Chicago. Their lives had become tame now that they were older. Although Frank was 84, he still looked after 72-year-old Jennifer by going to the grocery store every week while she stayed at home. For a week, Jennifer had to use her husband's car to do the grocery shopping, only to find herself in the back seat of a police car. Frank had mentioned that he wasn't feeling well, which Jennifer took seriously considering his age. She told him to rest and take care of him until he got better. Frank tried to disagree, but Jennifer insisted she could do his part for a week, even driving. However, it had been almost 5 years since she had driven a car. As retirees, they knew they had to think about their spending and realized that all they needed was a modest lifestyle. There wasn't much Jennifer needed to buy. A few things were needed: eggs, milk, garlic, cheese, and bread. Luckily, the store wasn't far away, but Frank still wouldn't have let his wife drive if he'd known what was wrong with his car. As a psychologist, Frank preferred a humble life to a flashy lifestyle. He wanted a durable and comfortable car, so he chose the Chevrolet Equinox. The car was a brilliant buy despite the fair mileage, but it still went somewhat unnoticed when Frank let his wife drive to the shop. Jennifer adjusted her seat so she could see over the steering wheel and set off. It didn't take long for her to realize something was wrong. Although Jennifer was new to the driving experience, she knew that a car shouldn't vibrate violently. She decided to take the vehicle to the nearest gas station in search of help, undeterred that the police were there. A mechanic inspected the car 15 minutes later, and Jennifer explained the vibrations she felt while driving. The man nodded in understanding but didn't have good news for her. She was told that all of her tires needed to be replaced as they were not in roadworthy condition. She didn't have the money for such an expense, but she had something in mind. Jennifer suggested the idea of driving home so her husband could look at getting the tires fixed to save money. However, the mechanic explained that it was illegal because the tires were dangerous for them and other drivers. Jennifer whispered back that she had to take the risk. She had no money, so what else could she do? Although she whispered, her words had been overheard. She hadn't noticed the policeman sitting behind her until after she'd suggested driving away from there illegally. He had heard everything and decided to get up and approach her. Her heart started beating like an Olympic runner going for gold. He pulled up right in front of her and said, "Ma'am, I heard what you just said, and I want you to get in my squad car, please." Jennifer froze in front of him. She knew she was in a difficult situation and that there was no way out. "Please, officer, you don't have to take me with you. I just don't have enough money to pay for the tires," she begged him. "No, you don't understand, ma'am. I'll speak to the mechanic, but I want you to wait in my car," he replied simply. Reluctantly, she followed the officer and got into his vehicle, but he let her in the front instead of the back. What happened? She was as confused as ever. The police officer spoke to the mechanic, and after she saw them shaking from something, he walked back to his vehicle with a cold expression on his face. She was concerned that her situation had just deteriorated. When he got to the car, he introduced himself as Officer Callahan. He told her he had just made a deal with the mechanic. It was one she would never forget. "Everything is covered, ma'am. I made a deal with the mechanic. I paid for all your tires, and he'll change the oil on the house," Callahan said matter-of-factly. Tears welled up in Jennifer's eyes. It was such a nice touch. She couldn't wait to get home and tell her husband, but would she come home? She found she was still being held in a police car.